Good morning, distinguished participants, colleague, representative from ROPME member states, and our speaker, Mr. George Stafford, this person, technical advisor from OSRL. It is my pleasure, on behalf of His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al Ahmed, the ROPME Executive Secretary, to welcome you all to this important oil spill dispersant workshop organized by the ROPME, MEMAC, in cooperation with the OSRL. Oil Spill Response Limited. The primary objective of today's workshop is to provide member states with an update and understanding of the use and significance of dispersants in oil spill response operation. We will also discuss the recent market exit of the widely used Corexit dispersant and its potential implication for our region, preparedness, and response capabilities. As you know, maintaining effective regional capacity for oil spill response is vital to the protection of our shared marine environment. This session will therefore help us explore suitable policy adjustment, strengthening the ROPME's framework, and ensure the continuity of dispersant capability and availability across member states. Mr. George Stafford, technical advisor from OSRL, will provide valuable insights into current industry update, the global implications of the Corexit continuation, and best practice moving forward. I encourage all participants to engage actively during the discussion and during the question and answer session, as your experience and feedback are essential in shaping the future direction of our regional preparedness program.
Excellent. I'll get started. So thank you very much for that introduction. That was an excellent introduction. And I think you've summarized it nicely. So the aim of today is to go over a little bit about dispersants, and then, as you said, to talk a bit about some of the recent industry changes which have had an impact on the dispersant industry and the oil spill industry as a whole. So just to introduce myself, my name's George. I work for OSRL. I've worked for OSRL for about 7 years now, but prior to that, I'm a chemical engineer by training. And I worked in our response team at OSRL for about 5 years and responded on various spills around the world. And more recently, in the last 3 years, I have joined our small technical team that we have here at OSRL, who specialize in dispersants. They specialize in looking after our global stockpiles of dispersant, but also in dispersant advocacy. So that's working with different regulators around the globe to try and encourage good practice when it comes to dispersant regulation and dispersant use. So over the last 3 years, that's where I have been specializing, and hopefully I'll be able to provide some interesting insights specifically to ROPME and how dispersant regulation can affect your response capabilities. So for those of you who might not be aware, as I mentioned, I work for a company called OSRL. We are the largest internationally funded cooperative who respond to oil spills, and we're effectively jointly owned by all the major oil and gas companies globally, well, most of the major oil and gas companies globally. So many of the operators who are in ROPME regions are members of OSRL. And what that means is they have access to our global stockpiles of equipment. So we have stockpiles dotted around the globe. We have a stockpile in Bahrain, we have a stockpile in Singapore, in the UK, and Fort Lauderdale, and a few other locations around the world. So we have equipment stockpiles, and we also have large stockpiles of dispersant as well. So as members who operate in ROPME, they will also have access to OSRL's large dispersant stockpiles. So for the purposes of this discussion, that's fairly relevant, because what we would like to try and do is make sure that if there were to be an incident in your regions, that you have access to as many resources as possible. And in some situations, dispersant is going to be a good response strategy, and we want to try and ensure that you have access to as much dispersant as possible should you need it. So that's a little bit about OSRL, and that's who I work for. So as an agenda for the presentation today, I'm going to just touch upon the role of dispersants in an oil spill response. Now, I'm aware that many of you work in the oil spill industry and the oil industry, and so you will most likely be aware of why dispersants are important. But I think just to kind of frame our discussion today, it's worthwhile just having a reminder of exactly why it is such an effective response strategy. Once I've gone through that, we'll talk a bit about the changes in the industry, and there have been quite a few changes over the last 2 to 3 years, particularly around dispersant, and we'll discuss that particularly around Corexit. I'll then go into talking about your specific regulatory framework around dispersants, and how the Corexit situation might impact that. And then I'll make a few kind of suggested small amendments that you could make to your framework to potentially give you a little bit better access and more robust access to dispersant should you need it. And at the end, we will have plenty of time, hopefully, for some questions and answers, and we'll be able to have some good discussion, hopefully. I'll be interested to see and get your thoughts on some of my, I guess, suggested changes. So first of all, why do we use dispersants? And I think it always comes back to the main aim of an oil spill response being to minimize the net environmental impact. And how we do that can differ depending on the scenario. And in many cases, the most devastating impacts of an oil spill occur when you have a large shoreline impact, because at the shoreline you have a higher proportion, a higher concentration of wildlife. You can have much larger socio-economic impacts because there might be tourism, there might be other industries which are affected. And also, once it does impact the shoreline, it is much, much harder to clean up. It can be hugely labor intensive, and it can be a very, very difficult operation, depending on the coastline, to get that environment back to how it was before. So that can be a big challenge. And then lastly, on this slide, you also create an enormous amount of waste when responding on the shoreline, because you're going to be most likely collecting other substrates like sand, etc. And so that can be a kind of secondary issue that you then have to deal with. So in some scenarios, the use of dispersants can prevent that shoreline impact. And if we can do that, then it can make a big impact on that net environmental impact that the oil spill has. So that is one of the reasons why dispersants is such a useful tool, because it can, when used in the right scenarios, prevent a big shoreline impact. But one of the kind of often asked questions, if you were to speak to someone on the street, is, well, why don't we just rely on containment and recovery? Because intuitively, containment and recovery, you would think, is an excellent solution, because it effectively completely removes the oil from the environment, and rather than dispersing it into the water column, you're completely removing the oil. So intuitively, that seems like a better solution. But the limitations of containment and recovery are that historically, when you do containment and recovery operations, you might only expect to recover a really small fraction of any large offshore oil spill. So I think the stats say that a fraction of potentially 2 to 10% of the spill oil can be recovered by containment and recovery. And that's just because of the nature of the beast. it's a very, very difficult thing to do. If you have an oil spill on a large area of water, it'll quickly spread. And so if you have, no matter how many vessels you have, it's going to be very difficult to capture all of that oil. And the picture on the right there, I think, is a good example. I believe this is from the Macondo BP spill, but you can see the oil there, and the size of the vessels that are conducting containment and recovery operations. And you can imagine if that oil is spread over a much larger area, it's very, very difficult to capture all of that oil. So although containment and recovery may have a place in your response strategy, if you do want to minimize that net environmental impact, then dispersants do have a really important role to play. And the reason for that is dispersants do offer some really significant advantages. So a big advantage or two advantages are one, that it can be applied aerially, so it can be applied using an aircraft, which gives big advantages compared to a vessel-based response, because you can get on scene much, much more quickly, and you can treat that oil when it's still at an early state of weathering. You can cover a much wider area because an aircraft is traveling at 100 to 150 knots compared with a vessel which might only be able to travel at 2 knots. So if you're applying dispersant aerially, you can treat a much, much wider and bigger volume of oil than you would potentially be able to do with traditional containment and recovery. And secondly, you can also apply dispersant subsea, and this can have even greater advantages because if you apply it subsea, you can treat a very, very high percentage of the oil, and it probably won't be quite 100%, but it's going to be close to 100% because you're applying that dispersant right at source. So it minimizes the oil surfacing, and not only that, but you can apply it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you're not reliant on daytime hours. So being able to apply dispersant subsea is one of its biggest advantages. And that's one of the reasons why so much investment has been made into large stockpiles and to subsea injection equipment. And as I mentioned before, the kind of box on the right there just indicates that if you just purely rely on mechanical recovery, it does run the risk of eventual shoreline stranding. The encounter rate is significantly lower than both subsea and aerial application, and you also have that kind of waste element to consider. You probably aren't going to produce as much waste as if you're responding on a shoreline necessarily, but there still is a lot of waste which is going to be produced. So dispersant does offer a lot of big advantages, which isn't to say that dispersant is always going to be the best response strategy. There are some scenarios where dispersant is not going to be the best response strategy for various reasons. There might be particular sensitivities where you don't want to apply dispersant, and it might be that you're too close to the shoreline or the water's too shallow. So there are scenarios where dispersant is not the best strategy, but the aim of good preparedness is to make sure that we have access to as many strategies as possible to make sure that we can mount the best response to minimize that environmental benefit, which is always the most important thing. So that's just a bit of a refresher of why dispersants are important. That's probably not new information for many of you, but I think it's just a good place to start to frame our discussions of why we want to try and maintain access to dispersants so we have it as an option in our toolkit if we are responding. So the next bit I want to talk about is around a big industry change which has happened in the last 3 years, I guess. And that's because a company called ChampionX, who are the manufacturer of Corexit, which is a well-used and well thought of dispersant, announced in 2022 that they were no longer going to produce Corexit. And importantly, they were also no longer going to support Corexit when it came to regulatory approvals. Now, the reason that they decided to do this is because the dispersant industry as a whole is a bit of a unique business model because they don't sell large amounts of dispersant regularly. If there is an incident, they might suddenly sell a large volume of dispersant. But also, there are organizations like ourselves who have large stockpiles, which members can sign up to, which also discourages the purchasing of dispersant. So, Champion X had not really sold a lot of dispersant for a long time. And the other kind of thing to consider with dispersant is that, particularly when it's used in the US and litigious environments, is that there can be a litigious risk to the use of dispersant. So I know that Champion X, for example, are still involved in lawsuits to do with the use of dispersant. Well, to do with the oil spill response in the US in Macondo, probably over 10 years ago now, and that obviously has a cost to their business. Now, I just want to highlight that they are not involved in any litigation directly against Champion X for the use of dispersant, but what they are involved in is litigation that is against BP, which they have to take part in as witnesses, which costs them money. So they view potential litigation as a risk to their business, but they're not seeing the commercial gain as a result of selling dispersant that justifies that. So they have decided that dispersant is not something that they want to continue to support, and so they're no longer going to produce it, and they are no longer going to register Corexit products for approval in any countries. That's the important bit. So why is that a problem? Well, having a lack of regulatory support means that Corexit can't be used when the approvals have expired. So if, for example, Corexit is registered in the UK, that's where I'm sitting now, often these registrations will expire after a certain date, and Corexit have said that they will no longer register Corexit on the approved list. So that means it cannot be used in that jurisdiction. And there are many large stockpiles of Corexit around the world. So in terms of OSRL stockpiles, Corexit accounts for 20% of our global dispersant stockpile. So we've got 1,000 meters cubed of Corexit, which we have stored in warehouses around the world. And then it also accounts for 26% of our SLA stockpile. So I'm not going to go too much into the differences between those two stockpiles, but effectively, Corexit accounts for around 20 to 25% of the dispersant that we hold. But also, we are not the only dispersant stockholders. There are many other stockholders around the world, particularly in the US, where Corexit accounts for about 90% of their stockpiles. But essentially, it's one of maybe three main dispersants which are widely stocked. And so if you lose access to it, then that is quite a big issue because it means in the event of an incident, you're missing a proportion of your dispersant stockpile. Now, it's particularly relevant to the US at the moment, and that's because it has coincided with a change in regulations that has been made in the US, where they've effectively adjusted their requirements for the registration of a dispersant, and they've said that all dispersant manufacturers will have to re-register their products under the new toxicity and efficacy requirements. So because Champion X have said we're not going to register Corexit products, that means that in the US it will no longer be approved. That's why it's particularly relevant in the US. But also in the more medium term, it's relevant globally because many other countries also have approval mechanisms where Corexit will expire. And as it does expire in various places, Corexit will gradually become less and less usable globally, unless countries make regulatory changes to avoid that. So the current situation is that all of our stockpiles, OSRL stockpiles, remain response ready. And Champion X have withdrawn support for re-registrations, which has had an impact in certain places. So, for example, in France, Corexit is already expired. In the US, it will expire at the end of this year. In Brazil, it will expire in 2026. And in the UK, it will expire in 2028. The reason I've selected those countries, I will go into later. They have kind of quite an importance globally, the registrations in those countries, which I will touch upon in a bit. So industry have looked to react to this change. And in the US, that has looked like many of the OSROs or oil spill response organizations in the US have began to replace their Corexit stock with alternative products, which, as you can imagine, is quite a big investment. And OSRL are considering the replacement of our Corexit products, but for us, we have slightly less urgency because we are a global company. We respond globally, and in many places, Corexit is still usable. So we are considering it and looking into it, but haven't yet made that decision or made any purchasing decision. If we were to replace Corexit, we'd be looking to replace it with a product which had global approvals. And so there are 3 products which have been approved in the US under their new regime, which are those ones listed there. And importantly, one of a big proportion of our stockpile, Finosol OSR 52, has been submitted for registration with the US EPA and looks like it will pass those requirements, which for us is important. So now I just want to talk a bit about dispersant approvals, how they work, how different countries do it, how the ROPME region does it, because there are a lot of different ways that countries will approve dispersants. One of the kind of, I guess, more common mechanisms for approving dispersants is that countries will hold pre-approved lists of products. So in the UK, in the US, and France, Australia are examples of countries that do this. And they will require manufacturers to submit a variety of information on their products, which normally includes toxicity testing. It will include efficacy testing. It'll include lots of information about the product, so viscosities, physical characteristics. And if the product is deemed to pass their thresholds, so if it's passes the toxicity thresholds and if it passes the efficacy thresholds, then they will then list that product on their list of on their approved list. And that will mean that if an organization wants to respond to an oil spill with dispersant, they will have to use a dispersant which is on that list. Now, often those products will only remain on the list for a set amount of time, after which the manufacturer will have to apply to re-register it. And that is where the Corexit issue causes a bit of a problem, because as those products expire, the manufacturer has said that they will not apply to re-register. And many of these countries do require the manufacturer to be the one to register the product. It can't be a third-party entity. It can't be a oil spill response organization. It has to be the manufacturer. So that's why Corexit will potentially become less usable in some of these countries if slight changes to the regulations aren't made. So that's how some countries do it in the UK, US, France, Australia. But other countries do it slightly differently. They might have a national oil spill contingency plan in which they detail their dispersant policy. And then at the end, in an appendix or something, they might have a list of dispersants which are approved. And it can vary how they choose those dispersants. They might just choose them based on well-known dispersants. They might choose them based on dispersants which are approved in the countries I've mentioned before. So that's one way that countries will sometimes state the allowed dispersants will be in their national oil spill contingency plan. some countries do things differently. So, for example, ROPME will generally approve dispersants which are approved in at least two out of the three countries, France, the UK, and the US. And for reasons I'll go into in a bit, that is quite a good strategy for a number of reasons. And so ROPME do it that way. Some other countries might reference different places. So depending on where they are in the world, some countries might reference the Australian regime, or some countries it might just be one out of the three countries. There are slightly different ways that places will do it, but in essence, they're referring back to one of those other lists. And then, as always, some countries have no policy whatsoever, and that's something that certainly at OSRL we will advocate against, because when you are in a response scenario, as you're probably well aware, you want to have had as many decisions as possible already made, because that allows you to respond much more quickly and much more efficiently. So you don't want to be having a discussion about what dispersants to use when you've already had a spill. So having no policy is not ideal, and it's not something we would advocate for. But obviously for the ROPME region, that's not the case. You've got a very robust dispersant policy, so that is good. So I just want to go in to your current policy now and talk specifically around how the ROPME region does things. And so there are effectively two important documents which are relevant for dispersant policy. One is this fact sheet, which I've got a one page of there up on the slide, but it is does have a number of pages which talk about when dispersants are usable. It gives guidance on how they should be used. It gives guidance on the scenarios in which it should be used, and it's a very, very useful document for a operator or a response company to refer to. And within that document, there's an important line which states dispersant use in the ROPME Sea area is governed by ROPME requirements, which state that which involve that dispersants are approved by at least two of the internationally recognized authorities, namely CEDRA, which is the French authority, the US EPA, and DEFRA, or which is now the MMO in the UK. So any dispersants which are on at least two of those lists are therefore approved for use in the ROPME Sea area. And within that fact sheet, you list the dispersants which at the time of publishing were on at least two of those three lists. So that's the fact sheet. And then the other important document when it comes to dispersant policy, or ROPME's dispersant policy, is this kind of circular memo, which is issued every few years on a regular basis. And that states the named dispersants which are taken from those two out of three countries which were on those lists at the time of publishing of this circular document. That's important to note, that obviously this list is taking dispersants that were on those other countries' lists at the time of publishing. And then at the bottom of this circular, you've got some exceptions for specific products have exceptions, but I would guess that it's because there are certain stockholders in your region which still have stock of that dispersant, and although it's come off the lists of the UK, France, and the US, you still want to maintain access to those stocks, which I think is a very good way to look at things. So that's your current policy. So how does the Corexit situation affect ROPME with your current policy? Well, you currently approve products that are registered in at least two out of the UK, France, and the US. So, as we've already kind of alluded to, Corexit has now expired in France. It's due to expire in the US in December 2025, and it will expire in the UK in 2028. So, based on your current policy, in December 2025, when Corexit is no longer approved in the US, or when the kind of circular memo is next issued, Corexit would no longer be approved in your region. And as we mentioned before, there are large stockpiles of Corexit globally, and particularly because many operators in ROPME regions have access to the OSRL's dispersant stockpiles, that would mean that there was a lot less dispersant that you would have access to if you needed it in a response, which is not an ideal situation because Corexit, it's important to note, is still a very good, very effective product, which also performs well in toxicity testing. So just to emphasize, there's no issue with the product itself. The product itself is actually a very well studied and effective product. It's just purely because the manufacturer said they're not supporting it that it's no longer usable. So those stockpiles still remain effective. They're still good. And if they're approved, they are a good response option. So that's how, that's why the Corexit situation is important when it comes to ROPME. And as I said before, right at the beginning of this presentation, what we ideally want to have in a response scenario is to have as many options available as possible to the decision makers. So ideally, we would have access to as much dispersant as possible so that if it was necessary, we could use it. Doesn't mean it has to be used. Those decision makers could say we don't want to use Corexit, or they could say we don't want to use dispersant at all. But if you have access to it, it means you have that as an option. And there are some scenarios where you will need it. So what are the good things about your current policy? Well, there are many good things. It's a good pragmatic policy, and it ensures that dispersants have undergone a really robust testing regime because the US, the UK, and France all have very robust tests that are required for products to be listed on their approved lists. So they will have to have passed effectiveness tests. It'll have to be a good effective product. It will have to have passed stringent toxicity tests, which will show that it has very low toxicity. And then it will have to meet also certain physical characteristics, which mean that operationally it can be used effectively. So an example of that might be that you don't want to have a product that's particularly viscous because that can make it difficult to spray. So by the fact that it's been added to the UK, France, and the US's lists, we know that it's a good product operationally as well. And having a dispersant policy in this way is a really efficient way to do it because it reduces the administrative burden on ROPME. It means that you don't have to do your own toxicity testing and repeat toxicity testing that's already been done. You don't have to do your own effectiveness testing and repeat effectiveness tests that have already been done. So it's an efficient way to have a robust regime. And it does mean that you're aligned with globally accepted products. And what I like about the current policy is that it also allows certain exceptions. So I mentioned that you have exceptions for ecosperse and one other dispersant, which mean that you still maintain access to existing stockpiles, even if they come off those other countries' lists. And I think that is where we could potentially make some slight changes to expand that idea even further. In terms of the limitations of the current policy, and there are a few limitations. One is that the list of dispersant, which is on that circular memo, becomes out of date if approvals in the UK, France, or the USA change. So if a product is removed from the UK list and the French list for whatever reason, it's still published on that MEMAC memo. So that could create some confusion because as a responder, do you go by the products which are on 2 out of the 3 countries, or do you go on the products which are on that list, which was last published? So that's a potential confusion, which I think we can clarify. Another limitation, which we've talked about a lot in today's presentation, is that it could potentially mean that you lose access to Corexit and other products if a similar situation were to arise. Because if those products come off those three countries' lists, it won't be approved in ROPME, and that could be a disadvantage because there might be, well, there are in the case of Corexit, still stockpiles which are definitely strategically significant and useful and usable. So that's a slight limitation in the way it's currently worded. And then lastly, and it's only a small thing, but I think at the moment the list of dispersants is published on the fact sheet, and it's also published on the circular memo, and that means that there are kind of two places which updates need to be made. There could be disparities between both. There aren't at the moment, but it just means that there could be a bit of confusion over which list is the definitive list. Is it the one in the memo or is it the one in the fact sheet? So I think overall, ROPME's current policy is very good. It's very robust. But there are a few small changes that I think could possibly be made just to further increase its robustness. So what do those changes look like? Well, if we were to address each of those limitations one by one, the first thing that I would potentially do is I would modify the wording just to indicate that the countries, so the UK, France, and the US's approval lists are the main reference point. So if changes to the approval lists happen after the publishing of the memo, it would always be the lists held by those countries which are the main reference point. I think that would reduce some confusion. The second change, I think, small change, which I think would be really important and give a big benefit to ROPME, is to make provision in the wording that existing stocks, so for example, an existing stock of Corexit, if they were approved at the time of purchase, so for example, when OSRL or an oil spill response organization purchased Corexit, if it was approved in those three countries at that time, then it would remain approved for use in ROPME. And that would mean that obviously if it did come off the list, it would still be approved in ROPME, which would be a big benefit. And then the third small change I would recommend is just removing the actual list of dispersants from the fact sheet and just including a reference which sends the reader to that published circular memo. And that way it avoids confusion and there's only one list which needs to be updated in the future. So in terms of what these specific changes might look like, I think you could potentially add some extra wording to just say that should the lists be updated after the issuance of this document, the current lists maintained by the respective authorities shall be considered the definitive reference for approved dispersants in the ROPME Sea area at any given time. And that would mean that if there are changes that are made in France, US, or the UK, then those changes would instantly come into effect in ROPME as well. So if a product is removed for whatever reason, then that would potentially mean that it was removed from the ROPME list. And the second update, and for me, I think this is one of the most important ones, is just to add some additional wording to indicate that products are still usable if they are in existing stockpiles. And I think there's already precedent for this because you currently have exceptions for EcoSperse and OD4000 saying that existing stock of that can still be used. And I think this just broadens that slightly. So the wording up on the slide is if a dispersant product owned by an entity within the ROPME Sea area, so that will give you coverage for your members or operators who might have stockpiles of a product that's become unapproved, or by a tier 2 or tier 3 oil spill response organization. So that could be OSRL or that could be another oil spill response organization who are authorized to operate in the ROPME Sea area, was approved for use in the ROPME Sea area at the time of manufacture. It shall remain approved for use even if it is subsequently removed from the list of approved products in the aforementioned countries, for example, due to the discontinuation of manufacture. And if we were to look at the Corexit situation, what that would mean is, although Corexit will drop off the approved lists in the UK, and France and the US, it will still remain usable. But I think it's important to note that ROPME at any point in time can revoke any dispersant approval. So by having this wording doesn't mean that any control is lost to the ROPME region. At any point in time, they can remove products. It just means that in an incident, they have one more option. So there's also the additional wording at the bottom that says this continued approval applies to dispersant products in existing stockpiles unless explicitly revoked at the discretion of ROPME, which is always an option. And I would also just highlight that even in a spill, just because a product is on this list doesn't mean that it has to be approved in the moment to be sprayed. The decision makers in a spill will always have the final say on what products can be used. It just means that if it's on the approved list, it is one more option. It doesn't mean that that an operator can just go and spray it without receiving prior approval. So that's one potential update that I think would kind of add an element of extra robustness to ROPME's dispersant policy. And then the final one I think is only a small one, in that rather than having a list of approved dispersants in the fact sheet guidance, I would suggest just including a reference to the kind of circular document that we've just been discussing. So rather than having a list, just say, please refer to the MEMAC circular, which is available as an addendum to this document and undergoes frequent review and update. And that would mean that it just kind of minimizes any confusion by having two lists on two separate documents. So those are my kind of, I guess, three potential updates, which is up to you guys to discuss and decide whether or not that would be advantageous for your dispersant policy or not. I've gone over the reasons why I think it would give you an element of robustness, but just to highlight, I think you would still maintain control over what goes on and off that list, and also would maintain control of what is sprayed in the event of an incident. So as a summary, I think the current policy is a really good policy. It makes sure that dispersants have undergone a really robust regime of testing. It makes sure that the dispersants which are approved are effective. It makes sure they have low toxicity. It makes sure that they're very usable operationally. So I think in general, it's a very good way to approve dispersants. But I think that there are some small updates which, given the current industry circumstances, could allow you to maintain access to as much dispersant as possible in an incident, which is going to be advantageous if you were to have a large incident. So there are three suggested updates, which I have shared previously as well, previous to this presentation, and which have been proposed to basically just maximize the ability for ROPME to respond. That's effectively the end of my presentation. That's all that I'd like to talk to you about today. So I'd just like to open it up to anyone who has any questions or comments or feedback, and that would be really great. I think the workshop was scheduled for an hour, so we've got about 10 to 15 minutes for any questions. So I'd invite any questions. If anyone has any, please either put them in the chat or come off mute, and I can do my best to answer anything.
Thank you very much, Mr. George, for this excellent presentation. It was very informative and to give us a lot to think about. Let's start with any question from the audience. Please just raise your hand, or I think Karam.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, sir? Good. Thank you very much. Thank you for the excellent dispersant workshop. If I can share one document here, in Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research over the years, this is about 20 years. Actually, my PhD was the safety evaluation of oil and oil dispersants approved to be used in the ROPME. So what we did is we have conducted a bioassay, a toxicity test of dispersed and undispersed oil using 5 oil dispersant approved in the ROPME area. The old list, that is Corexit 25, 257, 957 and 9500, Sligon, and the new 2 dispersants being sent to me by ROPME MIMAC, Captain Abdul Janahi, and we have tested those. If I can share one document, if you allow me, I can show you the presentation, one slide here. And we have tested those, and every single dispersion shows different mode of toxicity to our native organisms. For 3 native species, kobo boats and sea urchins, and so forth and so on. I'll try to share this one. If the Chairman, Mr. Chairman, can allow me to share. All right, just a second. Yeah, okay. And I can send you my publication.
Yeah, that would be really interesting if you could send that over.
Yeah, this is the slide here. I'll just enlarge this one. Possible. So, can you see it? The slide.
Yep, we can see it.
So these are the native fish of the Arabian Gulf of the ROPME Sea area, and all native organisms. And we have tested the dispersant Kuwait crude oil alone on the Kuwait crude oil, added to it individually the 3-type dispersant, then the phenazole and Sligon, phenazole only after that one. And we have tested it on the fish eggs, the larvae hatched during exposure, and the already hatched larvae. And we have approved, and we have, documented that Corexit is more toxic than Kuwait crude oil on the egg stage and the larvae. In the other scenarios, sometimes phenazole is more toxic than Sligon than Kuwait crude oil. In some cases, it's like a test chemical dependent test, and a species dependent test, and the life stage dependent test. So what I'm recommending here, that since I have an experience in those kind of things, and I have proposed this one to ROPME last year, that we should have a program designed for ROPME state members that they should test the dispersion approved in their region for their own native species, just to have a record of how much these dispersant can be toxic or not toxic. When I have proved one of the tests that Kuwait crude oil is even more toxic than Kuwait crude oil added to it, the dispersant itself. So it's not necessarily the dispersant is toxic, but crude oil, the parent crude oil, is more toxic than the dispersed crude oil. So we don't know unless we have to test it through a bioassay, whether it's a half a minute, 30 minutes bioassay, 1 hour, or 5 days bioassay. And we have experience in those, and we can provide the training actually to ROPME state members, and I have proposed this one several times during many workshops that we have conducted with ROPME, that we have the capacity and the facility to test those dispersants, to show and to have a record that these dispersants have different mode of toxicity or don't have. Not necessarily we should have a positive results. It could be a negative results, that there's no toxicity. We didn't test the dispersant by itself alone. We tested it added to the crude oil, as you know. But now we know for the state of Kuwait that these dispersants have those modes of toxicity added to Kuwait crude oil or Kuwait crude oil by itself. For the Kuwait crude oil is the export quality that is designed or manufactured for export to other countries. Now we know, and we're still doing routine tests with different species. The new test will be with the zebrafish. Zebrafish Daniel is a model species, international model species for toxicity testing, and we're now currently collaborating with one entity in Kuwait, and we will provide you with the results. And if you send me your emails, and I can send you these results. What I'm saying is their approval in the ROPME area should be based not on the manufacturer's approval for toxicity, but on the native species of each country that should be tested for UAE, for Bahrain, for Saudi Arabia, for Oman. They can conduct a bioassay, and we are ready to give a regional training for those type of bioassays, whether instrumental or just mechanical bioassays that can be conducted on the counting the mortality or survival. So I'm just adding, and I thank you for that one. And we have experience, and we're ready to collaborate with you as KISSR. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's really, really informative. And I think you've touched upon a really important point, actually, in that one thing that I perhaps didn't mention in the earlier presentation is that one limitation, I guess, of basing approvals on other countries is that those other countries will have selected their the species on which they do toxicity testing, probably based on species that are native to those countries, and in general they use fairly I guess
Zebrafish, zebrafish and Artemia.
Yeah.
And
So and different countries use different species. So there is a limitation there in that you won't be doing toxicity testing against the most representative species, and that certainly is something to consider. I guess the counter argument to it, I think we would all agree that in an ideal world, every operator would test dispersant with their own specific oil and on the species that are local to their own specific operations. That would be the best solution, and that would mean that you would always know which specific dispersant is going to be best for any given scenario. I think I would agree that that is the ideal thing. I guess from a pragmatic, practical perspective, it's whether or not there are the resources in country, whether or not there's the appetite, and whether or not there's the ability to do that level of testing and approval in order to get a full list of dispersants in all these different places. I think if it is possible, then that's great. But I think if there's a transition period whilst you set that up, or if it isn't practical, then basing approvals on other countries is probably one way to do it. But yeah, it's a very, very good point, and I think it's really interesting that you've done that study, and it's certainly I'd be very interested to see it. So if you're able to share that, that would be fantastic. And yeah, good point, and thank you for making it.
Thank you, Mr. Dr. Akram, and if we may give the floor to Dr. Marwan Dimishqi, please. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Marwan.
وعليكم السلام, Captain Arif.
Please.
Well, thank you. I will address few points. First of all, thank you, Dr. George, for the information that provided in your presentation. But I have few concerns about the current stock available, about the material, the dispersant corpset. Is it huge here in area in terms of cubic meters? How much do we have the pile stock of these materials in ROPME sea area? Do you have an idea?
So I personally don't know how much you have stored in the area. I guess my only thing that I would comment on is that many operators in the area are members of OSRL and have access to our own stocks, which would be usable within the ROPME Sea area. So I don't know whether the stocks are located there, but there's certainly significant volumes of dispersant which would be usable in the area in the event of a response.
And the lifetime of this material, is it really in terms of with the expiry, was going to be in line with the deadline of 2028 for the USA disapproval of this material to be used? Do you have an idea about how are going to dispose of it in the end, if we have to dispose of it? Is going to be a problem for disposal of this material? Is going to be the company or the country responsibility?
So that's a very good question, and it's one we've been considering as well. So just to answer two parts of your question, in terms of any expiry date or anything of the product, we do regular efficacy testing. So we test all of our stockpiles of all types of dispersant every 5 years to test that they are still effective. And we've been doing that for about 15 years now and haven't noticed any notable decline in efficacy, which from our perspective is very, very good because it's an expensive product and it's good to see that it still remains as effective today as it was when we bought it. So we haven't seen any trend of declining efficacy. So in terms of a shelf life of the product, there isn't really a recognized shelf life when it would become no longer usable. I think the good practice is basically to test it regularly and ensure that it has been tested within the last few years and shown to be usable.
Oh.
So that's one point to note. And then could you just remind me of the second part of your question, Dr. Marwan?
How are we going to dispose of it if
Yes.
dates for the expire date has been in line with the suppose that we go that we take the decision in ROPME that will continue using Coxit, although it's been discontinued with the approval or registry in the UK and France by CEDRI and MMO.
So good question.
If we take the decisions that would continue using it, as you mentioned in one of the amendments of our policy, what about the expiry? How are we going to dispose of it? Who is going to be responsibility? Is it the company or the country?
So in terms of OSRLs, so the stockpiles that we look after on behalf of industry, if you were to continue having Corexit approved and it was thought worthwhile by our members, the operators that are subscribed to us, then we would continue to look after it, stockpile it like we do currently. If it was decided in, say, 3 to 5 years' time that Corexit is no longer valuable because it's come off enough approval lists that we can't use it anywhere, then we would have to look at disposal options. And there are, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 potential routes. One is just literal disposal, which essentially is incineration, which is, I mean, I think that would be our last resort because it is an expensive asset that does, like, physically still have a use, providing it's regulatory, it's able to be used from a regulatory point of view. So it does seem incredibly wasteful to incinerate it. And also that has environmental implications. So that's one option, is complete disposal. The other option could be potentially you could either give or sell it to organizations or countries where it does remain usable, or we could. Or there has previously been talk around reblending it into a new product. So if you were, for example, to take 1 cube of Corexit and then you were to take another cube of some new ingredients, mix them together and create a new product, which you could call whatever you might call it, something different, which could then be registered. So those are the kind of 3 main options that have been looked into. But ultimately, if Corexit is no longer usable anywhere, because from a regulatory standpoint, then it obviously costs money to maintain, it costs money to test, it costs money to warehouse. So at that point, stockpile holders would look at disposing it through incineration, probably.
Well, this brings me to my next question. From your own experience, the approval and registry of the oil spill dispersant materials, which have been used for ages by the 3 adopted authorities by ROPME, I mean the US EPA, the oil dispersant list, which was, I think, the last updated is in April 2025, I think, and the MMO by the UK, and the CEDRI in France. Do they follow the same procedure as Dr. Karam They test the materials for its environmental impact, its toxicity, and efficacy.
Yes.
So these are approved labs. They test all these materials.
Yes, exactly right. So
And they get approval. In your opinion, to solve the problem, can we expand our list of authorities or bodies that approve and register new or existing products? Like you mentioned something in Australia or other countries. Okay, if this is gonna be like a solution, since we are limited with only 3 authoritative or international bodies who approve the dispersal materials, which country would you recommend? I mean, who has really good methodology and can be added to our list of authorities or bodies that can approve the use of this material in ROPME area. So which country do you recommend? Or authority?
So that's a really good question, and you're right. All of those 3 countries or 3 authorities, France, UK, and the US, do have robust testing, which has to be done on a variety of species in order for them to be listed on their approved lists. In terms of the countries I'd recommend, I think you already have the 3 main ones. I think the 3 that you currently base them on, the UK, the US, and France, I don't think it's any coincidence that you have those 3. I think those probably do have the kind of most well-known and well reference testing methodologies. Australia is another one that also has a very good testing regime. So that is a country that you could consider adding to your list. But again, I think you'd come up against the same problem because Australia also has expiries linked to their approval lists, and so Corexit would probably become unapproved in Australia at a later date. I don't know the date off the top of my head, but at some point it would probably fall off the Australia list as well. Those 4 are probably 4 good ones. Brazil is another one who have quite a robust testing policy of their own. So you could reference Brazil, but again, you come with the same issue. So you could add other countries. That is a definitely a valid option. The other thing that you could do is you could make changes to how many countries it needed to be approved in. So you could say it only needed to be approved in 1 out of 3, or 1 out of 4, or 2 out of 4, whatever it might be. So those all are valid changes you could make. But I think just the overall problem of the fact that Champion X aren't going to register them in these countries doesn't go away. So yeah, it's a valid consideration.
This is going to take quite long, but this is bring me to my next question. Dr. Karam, thankfully, has done some good research in Kuwait about the impacts and the toxicity of the combined toxicity or individual toxicity of the either Kuwaiti oil or combined with the dispersant material that he tested on our local and native species in Kuwait. But it's going to take quite a long time to really establish a methodology of our own to really approve the oil dispersant material that already been approved by like these 3 authorities or countries. What if the results showed that the combined toxicity on our native species is really high? In that case, that we have to apply much less quantities, so the efficacy of the dispersal material will be much lower. I don't know if Dr. Karam can really answer this question.
Oh, yes. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Marwan. I can answer this question, which I have been asked so many years. Every time I conduct a presentation or I go through a discussion, there's always trade-offs when to use and when not to use the dispersant, whether using a mechanical or a chemical way of combating an oil spill. Now, to know is better than not to know. And not necessarily, as I have indicated, that the dispersant is more toxic than the native crude oil. We have proven that crude oil itself by itself is more toxic than crude oil combined with the core exit or 9527 or 9500. But in order to, as this main strategy of ROPME, to preserve and protect our native species and wildlife, is at least to have a record of how much those chemicals, even then, the one I proposed is without the dispersant, to test the native crude oils of every single country in the ROPME, just to see how much wildlife is impacted by this spillage. Now, we are in oil-producing countries. We know, for example, always make this, if you cook in your house, there'll all be spillage. Some of the oil, some of the flour, some of the cheese and onions. This is part of the industry, part of the process.
True.
Now, to know how much those wastes impact your kitchen or your house is a good idea. No, so you limit those uses and not necessarily have to exclude them from your list. You will be still using them, but you know how much to use. Now, the trade-off, they say those tests have been done in the lab, which is in a controlled environment, but they are reproducible, and we have done them over the years. Those tests been published in international and referee journals and books. So they are standard tests and approved by internationally to indicate its relative toxicity. Of course, the scenario in the natural environment is different. There is more dispersion. There is more effect of the environmental, the sun, the oxidation, the wave action will break the crude oil. But we know that how our fish, how the multiple life stages respond to those toxicity. As an environmentally based association or institute or ROPME organization, you should at least have a record of the chemicals you are using plus the native crude oil you're testing. Because we've been asked so many times, have you tested those chemicals? Have you tested the toxicity of the wastewater being discharged? Have you tested the toxicity of your native? I asked so many countries in our last meeting with ROPME, they said, we don't have a valid or establish a program of testing the toxicity of our native crude oil, not only the dispersant, which they haven't done, I'm sure, and there is no record in publication. And those tests will not take a long time. If you have 10 dispersants, you need, for example, 10 weeks. If you dedicate a program or in a month, you can conduct 2 tests. The first test is 5 days, or could be half an hour using a microtox instrument, which can indicate the toxicity or the impact on the bioluminescent bacteria. Within half an hour, you get so many results. You can purchase the instrument, the microtox toxicity test instrument, 1,000, 2,000, and we have it in our lab, and we have the old system. So every country should buy this instrument, or I conduct a training for them where they conduct a bioassay, which they count how many larvae, could be done in 5 days. If you start on Sunday, you will finish on Thursday. And you have a table. This is one experiment. You conduct the LC50 testing and the software. At least you will know. Nothing can be built. It will take a long time to cross-check between the states. We send them our species, they send them their species. We send them our crude oil, they send us their crude oil. But you have to start as a regional organization. At least you know the toxicity of your crude oil. Then you move on to the phase 2.
I know it's going to take quite a long time to really have our own program to approve the oil dispersant materials. But could it be that one of the possibility is to run intercomparison exercise for the toxicity?
It was that one many years ago.
Yeah. With already well-established, facilities like in France, in CEDRI, and in the US EPA, and in the UK. This will be like a more approved methodology to test the toxicity of the special material that we are using in our ROPME area, that's going to be already added value to ROPME, wouldn't it?
Yeah. The approval of those dispersants in the ROPME manual 1998 is based on their approval in their manufacturing countries, France, USA, and UK. But those countries, they haven't done marvelous work. They haven't tested them. They have tested them on their species, the international species. They
That's
haven't
what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. If we run intercomparison exercise on these materials on our own species,
yes, this
is well approved labs.
True.
Yeah.
And we have an
thank you, Dr. Marwan. Thanks for this very valuable question. And Dr. Karam from Kester, thank you very much for clarifying all this one. Thank you very much. So we'll give some more time later on if we have a good chance. So can we give the mic to Dr. Wahid for some question? I think he's raising his hand. Dr. Wahid, صباح الخير, our expert from ROPME.
أهلا وسهلا كابتن عارف. Do you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Doctor. Loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Mr. George, for your excellent presentation. Thank you all for participation in this very important meeting, and thanks are due to MEMAC, my colleagues in MEMAC, for hosting and managing this nice, productive meeting. My question is focused on continuation of core exit and economic and possibly environmental implication of this exit. Too many oil spill response companies and environmental authorities in ROPME area and outside investing and spending much more, huge money on stockpiling of such dispersant. And you showed us, I guess, in one slide that it represents the most stockpile in ROPME area, if I'm not wrong. I mean, huge quantities are existing as a stock in many member states or OSRL at least.
OSRL,
right?
yeah.
Yes. So, there are some lessons should be learned from this experience, all right? No, we should avoid other dispersing companies or manufacturers, to manufacture, to invest in money, okay, and then to let them go in the market. Then OSRL or other response companies start to purchase and to stock in their spending money, and then for some reason, legal reason, economic reason, whatever, it says like I will not continue, like what happened with Champion X. This is representing huge money and economic loss. So there should be, I'm not sure how we can avoid such experience, such experiment. How we can, is it possible to add some kind of, say, commitment, legislation or whatever to these manufacturers that they have to commit to continue manufacturing, distributing such kind of dispensant in the market?
Yeah.
And give time. This is one question, and I have another clarification, not question, concerning the UK and why it is replaced DEFRA by MMO in UK. I didn't get this in your slide, actually, if I missed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, let me just make a note so I don't remember the DEFRA question. Don't forget the DEFRA question. So that's really insightful, actually. That's a very, very good point. And I think it's something that when these stockpiles of dispersant were purchased. Just to clarify, I think when I hopefully on my slides, when I talk about the large stockpiles of Corexit, most of those are that I spoke about, large stockpiles are kind of OSRL or industry owned. I don't know, I'm not aware of volumes in the actually physically in the ROPME Sea area, so just clarify that. But when those stockpiles were purchased, I would imagine this was not a scenario which was envisaged. But as you rightly point out, it is a big risk to any potential purchase of a dispersant because you could effectively invest a large sum of money into a product which 5 years down the line could suddenly become unusable that the manufacturer because of a decision by the manufacturer. So, when we have been investigating purchase options for a new dispersant to replace Corexit, which I would say we haven't committed to, but we have been investigating, that has been a big factor to say that any purchase we made would require a contractual commitment from the manufacturer to support approval processes for a specified amount of time. And the specified amounts of time from the manufacturers might vary from 10 to 20 years. And obviously, depending on what they will commit to, gives a positive or a negative weight to their proposal. So it's a very, very good point. It's an insightful point, and it's something that we're well aware of if we were to purchase new product because we don't want to end up in the same situation again. So yeah, very good point.
Good.
And then on your DEFRA to the MMO, I don't actually know the specific answer other than every now and then governmental organizations seem to change their acronyms even though they do similar things. So it's just it was just a change, but they do the same thing effectively when it comes to dispersant manufacturer. So it was DEFRA, but it's now the MMO who hold the dispersant approval list.
All right.
But yeah, very
Thank
good
you
point.
very much.
And it is something that we as OSRL are aware of, and I think other stockpile holders who are replacing their Corexit stockpiles are also aware of.
Thank you.
Anyone have more questions from the audience?
If there are no more questions by the other participants, then I have.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Unless if there's someone else want to speak.
Yeah, if you excuse me, Doctor. Thank you, George, very much for your realistic presentation, actually, which put us in the
We've lost you for a second. I think you've gone on mute.
Yeah, you got me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah. I repeat, I thank you very much for realistic presentation and put us in the right figure about the dispersant market, which will affect our choices in the future. But it's not a really question. I'm just interested in testing the efficiency of the dispersant stockpile. Maybe I'm not required an answer now, but if you can share your contact or something like this, that would be very helpful.
Yeah,
and thank you, Captain, of course, for giving us this opportunity. Thank you very much.
You are welcome,
Mr. Darwish. Sorry.
Darwish. Inshallah, we'll share the presentation and the contact of Mr. George Stafford to all the participants and MIMAC contact for any questions even after the workshop.
That will be great. Thank you all. Thank you.
معلش مستر درويش لو تعرف نفسك الله يخليك والجهة عشان لو أمكن لو ينفع.
Yeah, I'm Mohammed Darwish from SAIL, which is one of the OSR company located in KSA, working to protect the shoreline and offshore area for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and looking to have much more duties in the near future, inshallah.
Yeah, I can answer your question, Mohammed Darwish. Absolutely, we can provide some information. So maybe Captain Arif, if I could get Mohammed Darwish's contact details afterwards, I could share that directly with him. But essentially, there are kind of a number of different industry standard recognized tests methodologies which will give different results depending on the type of test methodology. And so I can give a bit of information to you after this on what those different tests are, and I can tell you where we do it and what we do, and yeah, hopefully that'll help.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you.
يعطيك العافية أخ درويش. Anyone else have the question? We come back to you, Dr. Marwan. 1 minute.
Yeah, if no one else would like to.
Sure. I thought someone. Okay, Dr. Marwan, yes, you can continue, please.
Okay, just want to really, I like the idea about what George has just mentioned and presented to resolve the issue of corkzit or other oil space material, which will be probably be not registered anymore. So the amendment and the suggestion to amend our policy and legislation for the list approved by ROPME and the I like them. It's quite good to have these options, but at the same time, I would like to really emphasize on using our capacity, as Dr. Karam mentioned in his presentation as well. We should really, it might take longer time to adopt our own labs and facilities to test and approve and come up with approval list of all spill materials is being used in ROPME area. So I'm thinking loudly, if we really can collaborate with institutes in ROPME area, like KISR, and to explore our facilities as research facilities to test these toxicity of the oil special material being used in our region, and then to come up with the as one of the methodologies by ROPME area. I don't know, this is just an idea, is to explore the possibility of combining the efforts of research institutes in the region to really come up with the testing and concentrate, please, Dr. Karam, not concentrate on the existing oil space material, the toxicity on our native species. I know the toxicity of the crude oils used in the area is quite important, but at least let's concentrate on the toxicity of the material being used and its impacts, so differentiate between what's already approved by these materials by the 3 countries, US EPA, MMO, and CEDRI. Again, I will say that we should really discuss the options given by George about modifying our policies and legislation in ROPME and MEMAC to really go ahead in the coming years, in short term, I mean, coming 2 or 3 years, until we establish our own methodology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marwan. Dr. George Stafford, if you want to say something about it.
So I think that sounds like a very sensible solution. I mean, I think as was rightly pointed out, the ideal scenario is to test dispersants and on the oils that you're going to be using them on and on the species that are going to be most affected. That is going to be the best solution. But as you mentioned, that will take time to implement, and there needs to be a period of time before then where if an incident were to happen, then having access to as much as possible is advantageous. So it might be that maybe some of however you'd like to do it, some of the changes I've suggested could be implemented in the short term, and then you could look at implementing a more kind of ROPME Sea area specific testing regime in the medium to long term. I think that sounds very sensible, Dr. Marwan. So yeah, thank you for your input, and yeah, no other comment on that really.
Okay. Anybody have more question?
Yes, it's Muhammad Mullah from Qatar Energy. I don't have a question, but I hope that George can share with us his presentation later on. Just send it by email or something, if it's possible.
Yeah, Muhammad, thank you. Inshallah, we'll share the presentation to all the participants. Thanks.
Captain Arif, I think the session is also recorded. The workshop is also recorded, isn't it? So it's a good idea also to share also the recording as well.
No problem at all, Dr. Marwan. I can share that with you later on. Thank you. Any more questions before I conclude? I think there is no more questions. MIMAC will review and study with ROPME the list of the dispersant after discussion with our technical team at ROPME, and we'll be in contact with Mr. Reis and with yourself, Mr. George. I just want to say, if you have any conclusion you want to say?
No, maybe a final question. I mean, to push things ahead, maybe, Captain Arif. So what is next? This is not a question, but possibly to foresee what we have to do next. I mean, Mr. George commented and mentioned that there should be a potential update from MIMAC on the circular dispersant circular with 3 suggested update. I mean, what is next to us working as a group on working on this issue, dispersant or spilled dispersant, etc.?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Dr. Wahid, maybe you have heard me, that I said that ROPME MIMAC will review and study if we can amend and check the list of dispersant with you guys at ROPME and OSRL. So we have to go back to His Excellency and take his approval if we can amend and keep the dispersant peroxide at the list after the expiration date of the company. So just we'll go back and we'll see about it.
Okay, great.
Dr. Wahid, you are with us?
Yes, great.
Yes. Anyone else before we end the workshop? Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll be sending you the presentation and
the recording.
A brief report about this workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you, Mr. George.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.